Hi guys, so this is solving quadratics by factoring. So in the last unit we learned how to factor, and in the last video we learned that if we had two things multiplied by each other set equal to 0, I can use something called the zero product property. So here I have a quadratic. It's not two things multiplied together, but I know how to factor from the last unit. So I can factor this, and then I will have two things multiplied together set equal to 0. So that's what I want. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to factor this. So remember, to factor, I'm looking for two things that multiply to 9 and add to 6. So that's going to be 3 and 3. Right? 3 times 3 is 9. 3 plus 3 is 6. Nothing was negative, so I don't have to worry about that. So the factored form of this is x plus 3, x plus 3. So that equals 0. So zero product property says that if either of these things equals 0, then the whole thing equals 0. Now these two things happen to be the same, but I'm going to show what we would do if they were different. Since they're the same, we could just say, oh, okay, I just need to look at one of them. But if they're different, I need to look at both. So I would set it up as two equations, and I would solve both of them. Now, these are the same, so I would just subtract 3. I get x equals negative 3, subtract 3, x equals negative 3. So it turns out I only have one solution because they are the same. Now, this is a rare thing that does happen, but again, it's rare, where you have a quadratic that only has one solution. Very rare, does happen. And this is the situation in which it happens, is when you have the same term, the same thing being multiplied together set equal to 0. So another way that I could write this, hold on, let me just type this in really quickly. Another way that I could write this would be x plus 3 squared equals 0. And then if I did my strategy from last set of videos, last week, and I took the square root of both sides, I would have x plus 3 equals plus or minus 0. Plus and minus 0 are the same thing. That's why we only have one solution here. Plus or minus 0 is the same thing. So negative 0 is just 0. We don't need to split this up into two cases. Plus or minus 0 is just 0. So yeah, so that's why we have this situation, this very specific situation in which we only have one solution. So almost always we're going to have two solutions to a quadratic. This is the one situation in which we're not going to have two, we're just going to have one. So this is the exception to the rule that I keep saying, always having two solutions to a quadratic. All right, so let's look at one where we are going to have two. So again, I would factor this. So I'm looking for something that multiplies to 7 and adds to 8. The only things that multiply to 7 are 1 and 7. And looky there, they add to 8. So that's good. Otherwise, I would say that this is not factorable. If this didn't work out, this would be not factorable. And notice that this 8 is negative. So I actually need negatives on both of these. That's important. Don't forget your negatives. Otherwise, your answers would be completely wrong. So remember to put the negatives, because this is actually negative 8. So that was sloppy of me to have not put that at the very beginning. That should be negative 8. So they multiply to a positive because they're both negative, but they add to a negative. So that's good. All right, so the factored form of this is going to be x minus 1 x minus 7 equals 0. And then I'm going to split that up into my two cases using the zero product property. So x minus 1 equals 0, x minus 7 equals 0, and then I can solve both. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. X equals 1, add 7 to both sides. X equals 7. So then when I put in my answers, the smaller one is 1 and the bigger one is 7. Notice if I hadn't realized that these needed to be negative, I would have gotten -1 and -7 as my answers, which would have been wrong. So we need to make sure that we're paying attention to those negatives. So that is solving quadratics by factoring. In later ones, we're going to be doing it when we have a number in front here, just like we did when we were factoring. So they're going to get a little bit more complicated, but it's the same strategy. It's factor and then use the zero product property. That's what we're going to be doing every time. So when we're solving by factoring, that's the strategy. If something is not factorable, then we have to go to a different strategy, which I haven't taught you yet. So that would be a different strategy. But as long as it's factorable, as long as this is factorable and this is 0, we can use we can factor and use the zero product property. Now, I could have a situation where this is not 0. Then I would need to say this was 1. I would need to subtract 1 from both sides first to get this to be 0 before I factor. This has to be 0 before I factor, or the zero product property will not work. So that's important. All right. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next video.